There's a type of person watching this right now, silent, observant, almost invisible online. No selfies, no constant updates, no need to prove anything. And if that's you, what I'm about to say might hit deeper than anything you've heard before. Because your silence is not weakness, it's strategy, and most people will never understand it. While the world is addicted to validation, chasing likes like oxygen, exposing every detail of their lives just to feel seen for a few seconds, you chose something different, something rare, something dangerous in a society that feeds on attention. You chose restraint, and that decision alone separates you psychologically from the crowd in ways that are almost unsettling if you really understand it. There's a dangerous misunderstanding about silence that most people never question. They see it as absence, as weakness, as something empty. But your silence is not empty. It's loaded, it's intentional, it's controlled. And the moment you understand that, everything about the way you move in this world changes. Because while others are rushing to be seen, to be heard, to be validated every single day, you made a different choice. You stepped out of that noise. You refused to participate in the constant performance. And that decision alone put you in a psychological position most people will never reach, because they are too busy reacting while you are learning how to observe. Observation is power, and silence sharpens that power like nothing else. When you're not speaking, not posting, not exposing every detail of your life, your mind isn't distracted by how you are being perceived. It's focused on what is actually happening. You start picking up on things that others completely miss. The hesitation in someone's voice, the forced smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the subtle shift in energy when someone is being dishonest, and while they are busy trying to control how they appear, you are quietly understanding who they really are. And that creates an advantage that cannot be faked. Because the loudest person in the room is usually the one trying to hide something, trying to prove something, trying to fill a gap they don't want anyone to see. But the quiet one, the one who doesn't feel the need to constantly project themselves, that person is grounded, that person is stable, that person is in control. Silence removes the need to perform. And once you stop performing, you stop losing energy. Think about how much energy people waste trying to maintain an image, choosing what to post, how to look, how to be perceived, constantly adjusting themselves based on reactions, likes, comments, approval. It's exhausting. It drains their focus, it fragments their identity, and over time they lose touch with who they actually are, because they've built themselves around what others expect to see. But you stepped away from that cycle. You chose not to give your identity to the crowd. And that is where your strength begins. Because when you are silent, you are not being influenced at the same level. You are not being pulled into emotional reactions. You are not constantly comparing yourself. You are not feeding off external signals to define your worth. You are standing outside of that system, watching it, understanding it, without being controlled by it. That's not weakness, that's discipline. And discipline creates control. There's something else happening beneath the surface that most people don't realize. When you don't reveal everything about yourself, when you don't constantly show your face, your life, your thoughts, you create a boundary. And boundaries are psychological armor. They protect your energy. They protect your focus. They protect your emotional stability. And in a world where people are constantly overexposed, constantly drained, constantly affected by outside opinions, that protection becomes a form of power. Because not everyone deserves access to you. Not everyone deserves to see you, to know you, to understand you. And when you become selective about that access, you automatically increase your value. Because what is limited is always more powerful than what is available everywhere. Scarcity creates importance, and your silence creates scarcity. People don't talk about this openly, but it's real. When someone cannot easily access you, when they cannot fully figure you out, when they don't have unlimited information about you, it creates a psychological tension, a curiosity, a pull. They start wondering, they start thinking, they start paying attention in a different way, because the human mind is wired to seek what it cannot fully understand. And you become that unknown. That's not accidental. That's the result of restraint. And restraint is one of the rarest forms of strength. Because it's easy to speak, it's easy to post, it's easy to react, it's easy to expose everything just to feel a moment of attention. But it's hard to hold back. It's hard to stay silent when the world is constantly pushing you to show more, to reveal more, to prove more. But you resisted that pressure. And in doing so, you separated yourself from the majority. Because most people don't control their actions, they respond to impulses. They respond to emotions. They respond to the need for validation. But when you choose silence, you are overriding that impulse. You are choosing control over reaction, and that single shift changes the entire way your mind operates. You stop being predictable. You stop being easily influenced. You stop being easy to read. And that creates a level of psychological strength that people feel, even if they don't understand it. They can sense it. They notice that you don't chase attention. They notice that you don't need to prove yourself. They notice that you're not constantly seeking approval. And whether they admit it or not, that creates respect. Because deep down, everyone recognizes control. Everyone recognizes discipline, even if they don't have it themselves. Your silence forces people to come to you differently. They can't rely on surface-level information. They can't assume they know you. They have to engage, they have to pay attention, they have to be present. And that changes the dynamic completely. Because now you are not just another face in the crowd, you are something they have to figure out. And people value what they have to work to understand. This is where your silence becomes strategy. Because it's no longer just about not speaking or not posting, it's about how that decision reshapes every interaction you have. It shifts the power dynamic. It shifts the perception. It shifts the way people approach you. And without saying a single word, you are influencing how others see you. That's control. Real control. Not forced, not loud, not obvious, but undeniable. And here's what makes it even more powerful. You didn't need to announce it. You didn't need to explain it. You didn't need to convince anyone. Because true strength doesn't require validation. It doesn't need to be seen to exist. It operates quietly, consistently, unshaken. And that's exactly what your silence is doing. It's building something deeper than attention, something stronger than approval, something that most people will never understand because they are too busy trying to be noticed while you are mastering the one thing they can't control, yourself. There's a system running silently around you every single day. A system designed to measure your worth based on reactions, likes, views, comments, approval from people who don't even know you. And most people never question it. They accept it. They adapt to it. They slowly become dependent on it without even realizing what it's doing to their mind. Because the moment your value starts depending on how others respond to you, you lose something critical. You lose control over your own identity. And that's where most people are trapped. They wake up and check who noticed them, who validated them, who approved of them. And if the response isn't enough, it affects their mood, their confidence, their energy, their sense of self. They start adjusting, changing, performing, not based on who they truly are, but based on what gets the most reaction. That's not expression, that's conditioning. And once you're conditioned to seek validation, you become predictable. You become controllable. You become dependent. But you stepped out of that loop. You made a decision, consciously or unconsciously, to stop feeding that system, to stop offering your identity in exchange for approval. And that single shift begins to rewire your entire psychological framework. Because when you are not constantly looking for validation, your brain has to find a new source of stability. It has to build something internal. And that process is uncomfortable at first, because you're no longer getting those quick hits of approval, those instant reactions that temporarily boost your confidence. You're left with something deeper, something more real. You're left with yourself. And most people avoid that, but you didn't. You stayed there. You faced it. And slowly, something started to change. You began to evaluate yourself differently, not based on who noticed you, but based on your own standards. Not based on reactions, but based on your own understanding. Not based on approval, but based on your own alignment. And that's where real power starts forming. Because external validation is unstable. It changes constantly. It depends on trends, moods, opinions, algorithms, people's biases, their insecurities, their projections. It's inconsistent and unreliable. And anyone who builds their identity on something that unstable will always feel uncertain. But internal validation is different. It's consistent. It's grounded. It's controlled by you. And when your confidence comes from something you control, it becomes unshakable. That's the shift most people never make. They stay tied to external signals, constantly adjusting, constantly reacting, constantly seeking. And in doing so, they give away their power piece by piece without ever realizing it. But when you detach from that need, you break the cycle. You stop reacting to approval. You stop chasing attention. You stop measuring your worth through other people's eyes. And in that moment, you become something rare. You become independent, not just physically, but psychologically. And psychological independence is one of the most powerful states a person can reach. Because now, your actions are no longer driven by the need to be accepted. They are driven by intention, by clarity, by self-awareness. You do things because they align with who you are, not because they will get the most attention. You speak when it matters, not when it's expected. You show yourself when it's meaningful, not when it's required. And that level of control changes everything. People can feel it, even if they can't explain it. They notice that you're not trying to impress. They notice that you're not seeking approval. They notice that you don't react the same way others do. And that creates a different kind of presence. A presence that doesn't rely on noise. A presence that doesn't depend on visibility. A presence that comes from stability. Because when someone doesn't need validation, they become unpredictable in the best way. They are not easily manipulated by praise. They are not easily shaken by criticism. They are not constantly adjusting themselves to fit expectations. They operate from a place that others cannot easily influence, and that makes them powerful, quietly powerful. Because think about it, if someone can control your emotions by giving or withholding approval, then they control you. If your confidence rises and falls based on reactions, then your state is not yours. It belongs to whoever is responding to you. But when you remove that dependency, when your confidence no longer relies on external feedback, you take that control back, completely. You become stable in a way that most people never experience. And stability creates clarity. Clarity creates better decisions. Better decisions create better outcomes. And it all starts with breaking that need for validation. This is why so many people feel lost, because they've built their identity on something outside of themselves. And when that external feedback changes, disappears, or isn't enough, they don't know who they are anymore. They feel disconnected, uncertain, empty. But you avoided that trap. You built something internal, something that doesn't need constant reinforcement, something that exists whether people see it or not. And that's what makes it real. Because real confidence doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need to be displayed. It doesn't need to be proven. It simply exists, steady, unmoved, unaffected. And that kind of confidence is rare because it requires discipline. It requires self-awareness. It requires the ability to sit with yourself without needing constant distraction or approval. And most people don't have that, but you developed it, step by step, choice by choice. Every time you didn't seek validation, every time you didn't depend on reactions, every time you chose to rely on your own judgment instead of waiting for approval, you strengthened that internal foundation. And now, whether you fully realize it or not, you operate differently, you think differently, you move differently, because you are no longer controlled by the same forces that control most people. And that changes the entire game. Because a person who doesn't need validation cannot be pressured the same way, cannot be manipulated the same way, cannot be influenced the same way. They are grounded in something deeper, something internal, something real. And that is a level of freedom most people will spend their entire lives chasing without ever finding. But you already stepped into it. And once you truly understand what that means, there is no going back. There's something most people completely misunderstand about presence. They think it comes from being seen all the time, from constantly posting, constantly updating, constantly putting themselves in front of others until they are familiar, predictable, and eventually ignored. But real presence doesn't work like that. Real presence is not built through exposure. It is built through restraint. And when you understand that deeply, you start to see why invisibility can sometimes be more powerful than visibility itself. Because when someone is always available, always visible, always showing every detail of their life, they become mentally processed like background noise. The brain stops paying attention. It categorizes them as familiar, and familiarity slowly removes impact. But when someone is not constantly available, when their presence is selective, when they appear without overexposure, the mind treats them differently. It pays attention. It engages. It becomes curious. And curiosity is the beginning of influence. You don't need to speak loudly to be remembered. You need to be rare. And rarity changes perception. When people don't have constant access to you, they don't get the chance to reduce you to something ordinary. They can't fully map you. They can't fully predict you. And the human mind struggles with what it cannot predict. It starts filling in the gaps. It starts imagining. It starts assigning meaning. And that mental activity creates presence even in your absence. This is why invisibility is not disappearance. It is positioning. You are not gone. You are undefined. And being undefined gives you psychological weight. Because defined people are easy to ignore, but undefined people are hard to forget. When you don't constantly expose yourself, you control the narrative in a different way. You don't give people enough information to reduce you into something small. Instead, you remain larger in their imagination than you are in their reality, and that imbalance creates impact without effort. Most people think influence comes from speaking more, posting more, showing more, but in reality, influence comes from what people don't fully understand about you, the gaps you leave, the silence you maintain, the parts of yourself you don't give away too easily. Those gaps force attention, they force thought, they force emotional engagement, and anything that forces engagement becomes memorable. And this is where your choice not to constantly expose yourself changes everything. Because instead of being consumed and forgotten, you are partially known and continuously remembered. People can't fully place you, and that creates a subtle psychological pull. They think about you when you're not present. They revisit interactions in their mind. They question things they didn't fully understand about you. And that mental repetition builds presence far stronger than constant visibility ever could. And while others are exhausting themselves trying to stay relevant through overexposure, you are building something different. Something quieter, something deeper, something that doesn't depend on attention but still commands it when needed. There is also something powerful happening beneath awareness. When you are not constantly visible, your presence becomes more intentional. Every time you do show up, it carries weight because it is not diluted by repetition. It is not weakened by overuse. It is not ignored due to familiarity. Instead, it lands differently. It registers deeper. It stays longer. Think about how the mind reacts to repetition versus scarcity. Repetition numbs perception, scarcity sharpens it. And when you are scarce by choice, not by accident, you control how people experience you psychologically. That control is silent but real. And most people never realize they have lost it because they never had it to begin with. There is also a shift in how others interpret you. When someone is always visible, people feel like they know them, even if they don't. But when someone is selectively visible, people feel like there is more beneath the surface, more to understand, more to uncover. And that perception alone creates a different level of respect and attention. Because humans naturally assign higher value to what feels layered, what feels complex, what feels not fully accessible. And when you choose not to expose everything about yourself, you become that layered presence. Not empty, not hidden, but intentionally incomplete in the eyes of others. And that incompleteness is powerful because it keeps engagement alive. It keeps curiosity active. It keeps attention directed toward you without you forcing it. And this is where your invisibility becomes influence. Because influence is not always about speaking. Sometimes it is about how long someone thinks about you after you are gone, how often your presence returns to their mind without effort, how deeply your absence is felt in subtle ways. And that kind of influence cannot be bought with attention. It cannot be faked with posting. It is created through psychological positioning. When you are not constantly presenting yourself, you stop competing for attention and start commanding it differently. Because now you are not one of many faces in a feed, you are a moment of contrast, something that breaks pattern, something that interrupts expectation, and anything that interrupts expectation automatically gains focus. That is why even your absence has weight, because you are not overused in the mental space of others. You are not diluted. You are not predictable. You are not easily replaced by the next post, the next image, the next distraction. Instead, you linger. And lingering is stronger than appearing, because appearing is temporary, but lingering is psychological. And people don't always remember what they saw, but they remember what stayed in their mind after they stopped looking. That is where your real presence exists, not in constant visibility, but in mental imprint, in thought repetition, in curiosity that doesn't resolve easily. And all of this is built through one simple decision most people underestimate completely. The decision to not constantly expose everything, to not always be available, to not always give access, to not always reveal. Because when access is limited, value increases in perception, not because you changed, but because the mind of others is forced to engage differently with you. And that engagement is where your influence quietly grows. without effort, without noise, without constant presence, just through the way you are experienced when you are not fully there.